They called the season the pall, a stretch of months when Tessarian IV's dusty sun sagged in the sky like a dying coal, and even the ice seemed tired of being cold. Wind peeled paint from the skeletons of derelict mining towers and combed the barrens into blade-sharp dunes. Nothing grew, nothing sang. The planets to small moons hung like old scars above the horizon, watching everything with the indifference of time. The Verati pack moved low against that horizon long, corded bodies hugging the snow, scales a matte charcoal that drank the light. Their gait was a syncopated prowl, paws splayed to distribute weight, tails held straight as counterbalance. From above, they looked like a ripple of shade traveling across a field of frost. Kor Arzath led them, because no one else could. Hunger wasn't a word to him. It was a geometry, the way his ribs met the cold, the angle of his stride shortened to save heat, the exact pattern of sharpness in his belly that signaled when packmates started looking like prey. He carried 3 scars that older Verati would recognize and read like a map, clavicle to sternum. He had once dragged down a stoneback boar alone. Flank to hip he had faced a spined kite and lived, and the crescent mark along his snout earned in a leadership challenge. That ended with a throat held and a whimper swallowed. All 3 ached now with the ache of the pall. The pack had names the wind could carry. Sharen, his second, smaller but faster. Scarlet frill nick from some long ago skirmish with the freight crawlers that used to thunder across the plains. Ikri, the runt, a whip-thin youth whose bones clacked faintly when she shook the frost from her scales. Morak, the elder, breath rattling in his chest like seed pods in a dead tree. 7 others, each a puzzle of strengths and fractures, trailed in their wake. 10 in all. 10 was a number the paw could easily carve down to 6, then 4, then 1, if Korzath let it. They hunted ruins because the living had fled. Mining had cracked the groundwater aquifers first. War cracked everything else. In the west, beyond the line of rust-streaked dunes, fields of slagglass glimmered where orbital kinetic rods had met the surface. In the east, storm shelters lay torn open and wine-flayed. Under the planet's thinning sky, the old prey had gone, the lowland tusk browse that chewed tubers, the sky skims that nested in the ice canyons, even the sly drift scours that ate the fleas, that ate the lice, that ate the mold, that ate the wind gone and the chain of emptiness that followed industry like a shadow. Korzath brought them to the husk yard, a cemetery of broken transport frames and cargo racks leaning at odd angles like ribs of titans. Ice had frozen machine oil into pitch-black amber. He put his nose to cracks and crouches, searching for what the Verati called warm metal, the faint still living hum that sometimes hid in batteries and power cells and could, if coaxed with heat, lure the tiny scavengers that clung to the warmth. Scavengers were meat. Scavengers could be turned into strength. He smelled only old cold, and the acid ghost of long-evaporated solvents. Nothing, Sharon whispered in pack cant, a series of breath shapes and tongue clicks. Her voice had always been wine-thin, tireless. We should go north to the crater rim. The last storms tore up the ice. There may be pocketed air, trapped valence. North has teeth, Korzath replied. The crater rim's winds could blow a Verati into a crevasse like ash blown off a brazier. We will go east, to the Wire Hills. Morak rasped at that, his disapproval a hollow rumble. East stinks of the metal tribes. He meant the human machines, unpiloted drones that still patrolled their dead owners' roads. They usually ignored the Verati unless a predator grew too bold and brushed a sensor line that tripped a defense program from some never-canceled protocol. The drones did not eat you. They simply removed you from the equation a day sooner than hunger would have. East, Korzath repeated, and there the matter ended. They went east. The day wore itself down the way a knife wears a whetstone. Wine-flung grit hissed against their scales. The edges of their eyes burned. Twice Ikri stumbled, and twice she rose with a strangled, embarrassed cough grin that said nothing is wrong. Alpha, the third time she did not rise as quickly. Korzath slowed the pack and angled his belly a fraction to block the wind from her. He did not look at her directly. Among Verati, kindness was done obliquely, as if mercy were prey you might startle if you looked at it head dash on. He found the Wire Hills by the way the ground began to spark with threads, the sheared remains of buried cables that the frost heave had spit up like hairballs. The cables crisscrossed and looped and arched into the sky, collecting hoarfrost, singing a faint, miserable song when the wind plucked them. Some of the loops led into half-buried maintenance sheds. Sheds meant shelter. Sheds meant possible caches. Sheds meant maybe. The pack fanned, low and silent. Carve lifted his snout and tasted the air. They're faint, not prey, not predator, synth fats. The signature of ration bricks. Those dense chupucks the human miners had used to keep their calorie counts stable. He slid forward, shoulder brushing ice-furred wire. Inside the closest shed, frost smoke rolled in lambent pulses from a torn ventilation duct. He put his paw against the threshold and felt the floor's buckled metal. The temperature gradient like a question under his pad. Warmer here. Not enough to be a trap's heat signature. Not the steady hum of active machinery. A residual warmth, the kind that leaked from insulated boxes that tried, in the memory of their construction, to hold heat forever. Sharon moved to his right flank, Ikri to his left. He flattened his frill in warning and sent them both to the sides with a little motion of jaw and nostril. He would go first. If the shed had teeth, better they closed on him. That was what leadership meant. Your body was a promise extended into the future. You spent it. Inside smelled like old plastic and ancient coffee, with a bitter metallic undertow of long-rusted blood. The Verati had a word for spaces like this, after-rooms, places that waited for people who did not come back. Even with all of his pragmatism, Carve hated after-rooms. They felt like the inside of a sleep where no one woke. He nosed through collapsed shelves and knocked aside a rusted toolbox that disintegrated into a puff of orange dust. Beneath a fallen rack, his paw struck something yielding with a crackle, a rations case wrapped in a foil weave. He touched his tongue to it. Synth fats, proteins, micronutrient threads, years old, frozen, then thawed a little, then frozen again. Dangerous if mold had gotten in. But mold did not thrive at temps without humidity. He weighed risk against the geometry of his belly. The belly won. He barked a low, tight sound, success. Verati gathered at the threshold, eyes wide, pupils needle-thin against the dim. He was still nosing the case free when a new scent cut the room in half, ozone and burned ceramic. Sharp enough to sting. Over it, a panicked rush of warm organic, not Verati. Not anything he knew. Alien. Fresh. Carve jerked around. The sound hit necks, a descending scream. The kind that comes when the air itself is being bullied aside. The pack exploded out of the shed and into the open as a long shadow slashed across the wire hills. For one disorienting heartbeat, the object looked like a predatory skyfish, wedge-shaped, with fins and a tapered nose. Then the wind threw the truth in their faces, the cracked hull plates, the shuddering guidance jets fighting and failing, the roulette spin of a craft that had lost an argument with gravity somewhere miles up. It hit the ground 2 ridges away, skipped like a stone thrown to hard, and came to a rolling, tearing rest in a shower of ice and wire and parts that had names once and now had only trajectories. The pack went perfectly still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, as if sound were a luxury. Sharon made a low noise that in another life might have meant reverence. Skybone falls, metal tribes, Morak croaked, meaning danger. Meaning, opportunity. Karv looked at the shed, at the ration case peeking out like a silver tongue, then at the plume of settling debris in the near distance. A leader's arithmetic is ugly. 2 meals dangled in his sightline. One was old and likely to break teeth. One was new and could end the hunt forever. One way or another. He chose the new formation. He clicked, and his pack condensed from wine-torn shapes into a single organism with 10 bodies. They crest the first ridge with bellies brushing snow to stay below the line of sight of any sensors that might still be alive. Heat signatures faded quickly in the pall, but aircraft carried persistences of warmth like ghosts, hot exhaust, a half-molten edge of a torn panel, a spar that had drunk fire. Those signs could trick a Verati into rushing a glare trap and cooking its pads. Carve tasted the air with care. The ozone bite was stronger now, splashed over with the bright, ragged copper of blood, alien. Thick, rich, Sharon's pupils opened to slack-round hunger. Ikri trembled in his periphery. Carve flicked his tail tip to steady them both. The wreck lay in a shallow spillway, half buried by its own gouged throw of ice. The hull bore glyphs Kors Ath could not read. The Verati had their own ways of writing scratch cuts in ice, scent posts in frozen air that held the memory of a message long after it was made. The metal tribes wrote in angles and number words like fences. These glyphs meant nothing to his eyes. Their edges cut his attention anyway. A panel popped and blew a gout of steam. The pack started as one and settled. Kors Ath advanced alone, head low, tail countering every micro-slip on the glassy spillway. He paused at a strip of ground where the snow had gone from white to cinnamon. He licked it. The taste was shock. All prey had it, that sharp adrenal brightness that said, "I am here to live." He found the break in the hull by the trail of handprints, odd five-fingered stamps smeared in that cinnamon. The prints were big for prey and placed a prite tool user. The Verati were tool users too, in their way. Knots, snares woven from windgrass and wire. Simple heat traps rigged over fissures to bottle the outgassing that sometimes lured Valence. Tool user prey could be dangerous in 100 more ways than teeth and claws. The prints led to a tumble of wire and ribs of composite. In the lee of that wreckage, a figure huddled. It wore a suit that had once been white and was now a manuscript of ash and scuff. A transparent plate covered its face. A spiderweb of cracks marred that transparency. But behind it Kors Ath could see eyes forward-facing, bright. Those eyes flicked to him, then away, then back like a small animal stealing glances at a cliff. Human, the word did not exist for Kors Ath. He would have called it other or metal tribe's beast if he had been pressed to make a language of it. The figure moved slowly, not prey-quick, not predator snap. Hands lifted, gloved, empty palms up. A common language, perhaps, the way wind is common. I am not striking. Kors Ath felt the pack's pressure beside and behind him, the muscle twitch ready to launch, the micro-rasp of claws lifting clear of the snow crust, the small, unkind miracle of saliva. The figure reached to its waist and touched a latch. Kors Ath tensed to spring. The figure did not draw a weapon. It unhooked a rectangle soft-sided, charred at one edge and placed it on the ice between them with the care of a parent. Setting down a sleeping pup, the rectangle opened with a hiss of released seal and a shuck of foil. A smell rose like a story told by a warm mouth, cooked protein, herb salts, yeast crisp. It cut through the pall and through the geometry of Kors Ath's belly, and through the entire history of the Verati law that said take and keep and kill. The figure this thin, soot-faced other did the unthinkable. He tore a portion from the steam-soft block within the rectangle. He held it for a beat, letting the steam roll around his gloved knuckles. Then he tossed the piece so it landed short of Kors Ath's paws and skidded to a gentle stop. Behind Kors Ath, Ikri made a sound like swallowing air. Sharon did not breathe at all. Kor Arzath did not lower his head. Not yet. He watched the figure lift another portion of food and place it on the ice. Not closer to itself, closer to the pack. The Verati had rituals older than the wire hills and the husk yards and the pall. They were written in bites and bows, in whose muzzle touched first and whose paw weighted the pile. There were laws for gift and countergift. There were laws for host and guest. None of those laws had lines for the spray offering meat with the posture of a packmate. The figure touched its chest with a fist. Sound came from behind the cracked faceplate, muffled by the suit's seals and by shock. Adrian. It said, in a language with a shape like shifting sand. Then it used another sound, soft and shared by dozens of planets in the Terran maps. A sound cut into the mouths of all who traded and traveled, and tried to survive one another's differences. Food. Kors Ath did not understand the word. He did not need to. The steam wrote its own meaning. Wind leaned in. The wire hills sang. Somewhere in the wreck, metal settled with a ticking the Verati associated with cooling teeth. Kors Ath stood between old law and new scent, and did the most difficult thing a starving leader ever does. He did not move. He considered. Behind him, his pack shifted on their pads. 1,000 tiny noises that made one big one, life-wanting. Ikri's breath ticked fast enough to fog the air like a moth's wing beating itself, to ruin on a lantern. Sharon's tail carved a warning line in the snow. Do not rush. Do not break formation. Do not make me choose you or the Alpha. Across the ice, the figure Adrian broke the most ancient of Verati bones. he met Korzath's eyes and did not look away. In predator country, that was confrontation. In prey country, that was something like bravery. What it was here, in a hushed valley of wire and wreck and winter, was a question. The steam curled and thinned and made itself a ribbon to tie around every hungry thought. Korzath's belly drew a long line inside him. He lowered his head a breath width. Not submission, not aggression. Attention. The pack leaned as one, drawn by the pivot of their leader's neck, their future hanging on the simplest lever in the world, a mouth opening. He waited one more heartbeat, because ritual is how you keep your teeth and your soul from being the same thing. Then, with the careful dignity of a creature deciding the next version of his species, Korzath extended his tongue to taste the air above the offered meat, and the world held its breath for what came next. The steam drifted upward in delicate coils, twisting into the pall's dry air like a fragile flag. Every Verati nose twitched in time with it, pupils dilating into dark saucers. The scent was a storm of contradictions, fat-rich like marrow, sharp like burnt salt, sweet like thawfruit, alien in its seasoning, yet so undeniably nourishing that instinct overpowered memory. The old laws whispered in their blood. To eat what another lays before you is to bend your neck. To let prey feed you is to lose the hunt. To accept food from outside the pack is to unmake the pack. But hunger was an older law. Ikri broke first. She was smallest, youngest, and closest to the point where hunger gnaws holes in thought. With a whimper gasp, she darted past Korzath's shadow and snapped the steaming piece into her jaws. For a moment she stood stiff-legged, bracing for punishment, for teeth in her flank. But none came. She chewed, eyes squeezed shut, then froze as her mouth learned something it had never known. Not meat, not bone, not blood, but sustenance all the same, dense, warm, soft as thawed fat, layered with taste instead of texture. It filled her mouth like a story told too quickly, too rich to follow, but impossible not to swallow whole. The pack growled low, a ripple of envy passing through them. The human Adrian watched. He did not flinch at Ikri's lunge. His lips pulled back slightly, not in the snarl of teeth baring, but in some other expression. The Verati could not read it, but it lacked hostility. Then, as if answering a question no one had asked, he tore another strip of the ration and tossed it further into the snow. This time, Sharon moved. She was second in command, and hesitation in her would ripple down the ranks like a broken signal. She stepped deliberately, crouched low, and took the piece with the controlled precision of a leader's test. She chewed slower than Ikri, head angled so her throat was exposed as silent communication to Korzath. I taste this first for the pack. If it poisons me, let it end here. But she did not fall. Instead, she rumbled deep in her chest a sound neither warning nor threat. Something close to satisfaction. The air grew thick with decision. Korzath felt the heat of 10 gazes on his flanks. His pack was starving, and here was food, freely given. Yet the weight of ritual pressed him. If he accepted, he rewrote their law in front of them. If he refused, hunger might tear them apart before the next hunt. So he did the thing that leaders must. He acted as if the choice had always belonged to him. He stepped forward, every motion slow, deliberate. His claws carved lines in the ice, marking a boundary around the alien and his offering. Adrian froze but did not flee. The human tore another strip of food and placed it directly on the snow, closer this time, his gloved hand retreating like a tide. Korzath lowered his head until steam kissed his nostrils. Then, in a single motion, he snapped the morsel into his mouth. The taste was unlike anything he had known. No sinew to tear, no blood to flood the tongue. Yet it was rich, constructed, concentrated, almost too much. His stomach snarled for more even as his instincts recoiled from the strangeness. He chewed once, twice, then swallowed, and the pack exhaled as one, as though they had eaten through him. What followed was frenzy. The human, sensing the shift, tore and tossed, until the snow between them was littered with steaming fragments. The Verati surged forward, but not with claws out. This was not the violence of the hunt. It was the chaos of siblings scrambling over a shared carcass, hissing, snapping, but never striking true. Ikri leapt to snatch a piece mid-air. Morak, the elder, bent his head slow but sure, his teeth clicking on foil. Even the strongest Sharen and 2 others lowered themselves not to fight for dominance, but to partake together. And through it all, Adrian kept tearing pieces, his eyes flicking between each predator, gauging distance and risk, yet never once raising his arms in defense. He rationed carefully, saving the smallest portion for himself. When the final fragment was gone, silence fell. The pack crouched, licking at the snow for lingering taste, their bellies humming with the first real food in weeks. They should have turned on him then, instincts demanding they devour the source. But none moved, because the act had become something more than feeding. Korzath's tongue flicked across his snout. He padded forward, slow and measured, until his shadow fell over Adrian. The human stiffened. The pack bristled, waiting for the inevitable strike. Instead, Korzath bent low and drew a long, deliberate breath across Adrian's helmet, marking his scent into memory. His exhale misted against the cracked visor like a vow. The pack murmured uneasily. This was a gesture reserved for those who had shared blood in battle or prey in famine. A binding, an inclusion. Adrian didn't understand the ritual, but he did not pull away. He lifted his gloved hand, trembling slightly and hesitant as a hatchling touched the broad, scarred snout of the alpha. The world shifted on its axis. The predators did not strike. The prey did not flee. In the space between hunger and survival, a third law was written: trust. And though none of them could name it yet, everything that followed, the hunts, the survival, the alliance that would shake Tessarian 4 began with that first shared meal in the snow. The pall did not ease. Tessarian 4 remained a graveyard of silence and wind. But in the weeks after the wreck, a strange new rhythm began to form between predator and human. Adrian did not run, though he could have. His shuttle still held a beacon, cracked but functioning, blinking a thin cry into the void. Rescue might come or might not. Until then, he stayed. And every day, the pack came. At first, the meeting was a ritual of food. Adrian shared what little remained in his emergency stores, portioning with the careful logic of a soldier used to scarcity. Each packet he opened felt like a gamble. He should have hoarded, eaten alone. But when he looked at the lean Verati, at their ribs sharp enough to cast shadows, the thought of eating in their sight seemed worse than starvation. So he divided, always in sight of Korzath, never sneaking, never hoarding. Half went to the pack, half to himself, though often half tilted more heavily in their favor. The predators watched this arithmetic with a predator's suspicion, but also with something close to awe. Then the ritual shifted, the gift of Tradian the 7th day. Sharen brought him a drift scour carcass, a stringy, insectal thing with chitinous wings like broken glass. She laid it at Adrian's feet and stepped back. It was not much, hardly edible by human standards, but it was a gift. Adrian understood. He knelt, smiling faintly, and used his survival knife to skin the creature, careful not to waste what little meat clung to it. He roasted it over a makeshift stove, the smell acrid but filling. When he passed a morsel back to Sharen, her frill quivered in shock. Prey did not cook food for predators. Prey did not return a gift. Yet here was a new law forming, a cycle. From that day, the pack began to bring him scraps. Ikri dropped a melted shard of nutrient gel, scavenged from a broken drone. Morak dragged in half-frozen roots gnawed from beneath the ice. Even Korzath Alpha carried to Adrian's camp the skull of a snow vole with marrow still inside. It was not much, but it was sharing. A language of gesture. Swords did not come easily. Adrian's voice was soft, a human current in the cold air, shaping syllables the pack could not decode. The Verati had no spoken language in the human sense. Theirs was a mesh of clicks, growls, frill flares, tail angles, scents. But patterns began to emerge. When Adrian wanted them to wait, he raised his hand, palm out. Soon, the pack stilled at that gesture alone. When he wanted them to follow, he tapped his chest, then pointed. They learned to obey. When he laughed a bright, sharp burst of sound, the pack startled at first, then grew to recognize it as not threat, not fear, not dash anger. I was quickest to mimic him, tapping her chest awkwardly with her claw and croaking a sound back at him. Adrian chuckled, and the pack tilted their heads, puzzled but curious. Slowly, meaning pooled like thaw water between stones. It was not language in the way scholars defined it. It was understanding, raw and unfinished, but growing. Hans Sharad's first true hunt came when the pack cornered a storm leaper, a desperate herbivore driven down from the high ridges. The beast was gaunt, its antlers brittle, but still dangerous. Alone, Adrian could never have taken it. Alone, the pack might have lost more energy chasing it than they gained from the meat. Together, they succeeded. Adrian rigged snare lines from shuttle wiring, stringing them low between collapsed beams. The Verati drove the storm leaper toward the trap with eerie coordination. It stumbled, entangled. Korzath struck first, jaws clamping the neck. The pack surged in, a blur of teeth and muscle. When it was done, Adrian expected them to feed without him. Instead, Korzath dragged the carcass toward him, nudging it with his snout. The Alpha's eyes gleamed with an alien challenge. You share with us, so now we share with you. Adrian hesitated. Raw meat was no friend to a human stomach, but refusing might break the fragile bond. So he carved a sliver, cooked it over his stove, and ate while the pack tore into the rest. They watched him chew, frills trembling, as if to see whether he honored the pack. He did, and in their eyes, something changed. Touch of the Alpha's greatest shift came 2 weeks after the crash. Adrian had been tending his fire when Korzath approached. The Alpha was enormous up close, scars like lightning strikes across his hide, breath steaming from fanged jaws. Adrian froze, every survival instinct screaming, but Korzath did not attack. Instead, he lowered his massive head, pressing his snout into the dirt beside Adrian's hand. His iamber, vertical pupil gleamed. Adrian understood without knowing how. Slowly, trembling, he lifted his glove and touched the predator's scarred snout. The scales were rough, cold, alive. The pack stirred, restless. This was no ordinary contact. In Verati custom, to touch the Alpha was to be claimed as pack-mate, a privilege few even among their kind achieved. For an outsider to be permitted this was unheard of. Korzath held still, accepting the touch. When Adrian pulled back, the Alpha rumbled deep in his chest, a sound that made the snow tremble. Not threat, not warning, something else, something like approval. And in that moment, predator and human crossed a line no one had thought possible. They were no longer enemies, no longer strangers. They were pack. The pall still hung, yet even as trust grew, danger deepened. Supplies dwindled. Adrian's rations could not last forever, and the pall offered no mercy. Worse still, the pack had begun to draw attention. Drones circled higher overhead, scanning wreckage, whispering their soulless hum. Adrian suspected they had marked the crash. Rescue might come, but rescue, for the pack, might not mean salvation. For now, though, in the cold silence of Tessarian 4, human and Verati hunted side by side, and the void felt a fraction less empty. The pall dragged on, week by week, until time itself felt brittle. The snow never thawed. The wind never relented. Adrian and the pack endured because they had learned each other's way, sharing scraps, sharing warmth, sharing hunts. But survival had a price. Every beacon pulse from the broken shuttle clawed outward into the void. Sooner or later, someone would hear it, and someone did. The sky splits. It happened on the 21st day. The pack was huddled near the wreck, bellies warm from a vole feast Adrian had helped snare. The Alpha drowsed in the lee of an ice ridge, breath fogging. Adrian sat cross-legged nearby, scribbling into his datapad despite the frostbite tugging at his fingers. Then the air changed. Every Verati head lifted at once. Their frills snapped wide, tongues tasting the wind. Even Adrian felt it. A subtle vibration, the low hum of engines layered across the sky. Then light broke through the clouds, a descending shuttle armored, its hull gleaming with the unmistakable sigil of the Terran expansion cores. Adrian's heart lurched. Rescue, home. But then he saw the way the Verati crouched, tails stiff, bodies pressed to the snow. Their eyes were wide, not with relief, but with the fear of cornered prey. They knew ships like that. They had learned the meaning of orbital fire and strafing drones. The arrival of humans had not been mercy for their world. It had been hunger, ruin, the pall itself. Korzath growled low, a rumble that shook through the pack. His gaze cut toward Adrian, sharp as a blade. Did you call them? Adrian raised his hands, palms open, heart pounding. No, he whispered, though they could not understand the words. His tone was enough: denial, apology, desperation. The pack did not break formation. They circled him, protective, as the shuttle's landing jets sent snow into a hurricane. Contact Terran shuttle's bay door hissed open. Out stepped soldiers in gleaming armor, rifles slung but ready. They scanned the wreckage, then froze at the sight of Adrian alive, standing, flanked by a ring of massive predators. Lieutenant Cross. The commander's voice boomed over comms. "By the core, we thought you were dead. Step away from the creatures." Creatures. Adrian's throat tightened. He looked at the Verati, at Ikri crouched low with lips peeled back, at Sharen's frill spread wide in challenge, at Kor's Ath, still as carved stone, eyes fixed on the soldiers. To the cores. The Verati were catalogued as hostile fauna, flagged for elimination or quarantine. Standard doctrine: clear the environment, secure the survivor. He saw it in the way the rifles lifted, barrels gleaming. Saw it in the tight set of the commander's jaw, a single order. And his pack would be cut down. The stand. Adrian moved before the order could fall. He stepped out from the circle of predators, raising his hands not to his rescuers, but to block their line of fire. "Hold your fire." His voice cracked in the cold air. "They're not hostile." The commander frowned behind her visor. "Lieutenant, step aside. Those things are predators. We can't risk." "They saved me," Adrian said, louder now, desperate. He gestured back at the Verati, who bristled but did not advance. "We hunted together. We ate together. I'd be dead without them." One soldier muttered, "He's delirious." Another, "Look at them ready to pounce." Korzath growled, and the rifles twitched upward. Adrian threw his arms wide, placing himself fully between the barrels and the pack. His breath came out in clouds, ragged. "If you kill them, you'll have to kill me too." The wordslins pressed heavy, broken only by the hiss of engines cooling. The soldiers shifted uneasily, fingers twitching near triggers. The commander stared at Adrian, weighing orders against the sight of her own man standing with beasts. Then, a sound split the air, not human, not Terran, but something else entirely. "Pak." The soldiers jerked in shock. Adrian froze. Slowly, he turned. It was Korzath. The Alpha's throat worked awkwardly, forcing the alien mouth to shape foreign sound. It came again, guttural but clear. "Pak," not mimicry, not accident, a word. The human word. The pack rippled with unease, but they did not break. They watched their Alpha speak the unthinkable. A bridge between species carved from hunger and trust. Adrian's eyes stung. He turned back to his squad. "You see, they understand. They've chosen me as one of them. They're not just predators. They're people." The commander hesitated. Protocol screamed one answer, but the word hung in the air, heavy as a prophecy. "Pack." And something shifted not only in that frozen valley, but in the long story of two species who had never shared more than blood. Echoest rifles lowered. The standoff broke, not with violence, but with silence. The cores would not change overnight. Reports would be written, orders debated, commanders challenged. But the seed had been planted. A human had lived among predators, and the predators had spoken the language of kinship. As the shuttle lifted into the bruised sky, Adrian sat among the Verati one last time. He broke a ration wafer in half, offered it to Korzath, and ate the other himself. The Alpha rumbled low, approving. And so it began, not conquest, not extinction, but the first fragile threads of something new woven from hunger, trust, and the simple act of sharing lunch.